This is for everybody on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for your support. This is also for everybody on YouTube. This is a series that we like to call Tuhon's Training Thoughts. It's a Patreon exclusive series of videos in which I talk about my philosophy on training, my philosophy on recovery, my philosophy on fighting, just my approach to martial arts in general. I wanted to open this video out to everyone because it's on a topic that I've been seeing a lot more discussion over recently, and some of it is not very intelligent and can be blatantly quite dangerous. So recently I came across a page where you had somebody teaching an armed forces unit knife defense or knife tactics or weapon tactics, and the approach that this person took to teaching this was through the scope of MMA. Now inherently there's nothing wrong with this. I train and teach Muay Thai as well as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I have a huge amount of respect for people who compete in these events, in MMA or in any sort of martial sports. We have students here who fight. I have nothing but the utmost respect for them and the way that they train, their conditioning and their ability to fight. However, there is context involved in these arts, and that context cannot be removed and cannot be overlooked. What do I mean by context? Now, if I am doing any sort of striking based art, if I'm fighting in the ring, I know who I'm fighting, I know how he or she is armed, I know how many people I'm fighting, I know what the rules are, I know what the time limit is, I know how far away help is, I know the area I am fighting in, the terrain I'm fighting in. I have all of these variables under control except what happens in the actual fight itself. When I am on the street or in this case, if you are out in the field, if you are law enforcement or special forces or military or intelligence, you are in the field, most likely you're going to have none of these variables under control, right? You don't know how he's armed, how many people you're fighting. So in this situation, even though the skills of MMA might come in handy, they need to be put in a slightly different context, especially when weapons are involved. At one point, I saw this guy teaching two, I'm assuming they were in the army, they were given training knives and they were knife sparring, and instead of using the knives in the appropriate way, these guys are firing roundhouses at each other from pretty far away. And what that showed me was, forget the skills of MMA, these guys don't even understand the basic skills of kicking yet. The larger problem is that, especially for Filipino martial artists or anyone who's training in most sort of knife-based arts, we are so used to attacking the limbs that when someone throws a kick from really far out, your first reaction is to cut that leg. And that's just what we train for. There is a reason why there is kicking in FMA, but it's based in a certain context, because we know, again, we train to cut the limb. You extend a limb towards us, we're going to cut it. Every art has a specialization. Muay Thai or boxing specializes in striking. Jiu-Jitsu specializes in grappling. Kali specializes in weapons. A grappler in a striking context against a striker is going to lose. A striker in a grappling context against a grappler is going to lose. Similarly, if it's a weapon-based context, it's the people who specialize in the weapons who are generally going to do better than the people who specialize in some other form of fighting. I truly believe that to be a complete martial artist, you should be comfortable everywhere. You can have one specialization, but you should be comfortable everywhere. But when you're training armed forces, you don't have years to get them comfortable in all these different places. You have a couple of weeks, a couple of months maximum. And so you have to really pick and choose what it is that you're teaching them, and the context in which you're teaching them is really important. Another issue is that there are some fundamental differences between weapon arts and empty hand arts. And most of them center around range, timing, and our approach to center line. If I am being punched or if I am being kicked, if someone's giving me a roundhouse, I can check the kick, I can wait for the kick to reach me, and I can check it over here. If someone's giving me a jab, I can parry the punch close to my face. In fact, the further away from my face that I parry the oncoming jab, the worse it's going to be for me, because then they can start faking the jab and coming around with the hook or playing around with the timing of my parry if I'm going too far across. With the weapon, it's oftentimes almost the opposite, because in empty hands, I can wait, so everything is coming towards center line. It may be coming from the outside, it may be coming straight, but it's coming towards center line. And oftentimes, I can wait for it to reach me to parry instead of reaching towards it. With a weapon, if I wait for the weapon to reach me, it's going to be too late. I'm going to get cut. If I wait for the weapon to reach me and then parry, I'm going to get cut. So with the weapon, I often have to go towards the weapon hand. The other thing when it comes to weapon versus weapon-based sparring or fighting, when I have a knife and they have a knife, my initial targets change. The way I bridge distance or I get closer changes. I am looking, my first target is that weapon-bearing arm. I hit that arm and then I can hit that head. I'm not going to go directly to the head and get all the body and then their weapon still being in play and they can be stabbing me as I'm stabbing them. This is a really big difference between empty hands and weapon-based martial arts, because there are very few empty hands specific, especially sports-based martial arts, that have you attacking the limb. You're blocking a limb, you're parrying a limb, you're framing against a limb, but you're not attacking that limb. In the weapon arts, that is my first target. I'm attacking the limb and then I'm attacking that head, right? I'm attacking the limb, attacking the head, attacking the limb, attacking the head. This is the general procedure that we're trying to follow. Now, there are ways where empty hand arts, grappling arts, MMA arts can help in my weapon arts. For example, for me, one huge crossover is empty hands versus knife. When I'm unarmed and I'm trying to fight an armed assailant with a knife, most often I'm going to need to be able to control that attacking limb. And in order to do that, wrestling or jiu-jitsu comes in handy a lot, especially when we start adding in frames, posts, inside like collar ties. If I'm not exposed to that before in some sort of controlled environment, and suddenly my assailant comes and gets that collar tie or pushes me against something, frames against me, and starts stabbing, forget trying to reach or control the knife. If I don't deal with this hand keeping me in place or pulling me close, it's very hard for me to do anything about this. And if I haven't learned to deal with these things, it's going to be very hard for me to pull it off when a knife is actually moving. So there are places where that crossover can happen, where having a good knowledge of wrestling or jiu-jitsu can make things like your knife defense better. However, again, context is important. You are specifically working on those skills in the context of knife defense. You're understanding what you need to do in order to defend yourself from this knife. You are not assuming that I can just roundhouse kick the knife out of his hand. And I'm also understanding the context in which going to the ground is a viable, intelligent option, because it's not always an intelligent option, especially for those in the armed forces. It's not an intelligent option to go to the ground because there's so much chaos happening around you. You're focusing on one person on the ground, somebody comes from behind and stabs you, and you also have a whole bunch of gear on you. It's not easy to move around. Now, lastly, I want to flip this conversation and try and understand how we got here. Why is this? You would think that weapon-based martial arts being better at weapon-based situations would be an obvious conclusion. You would think that it's not something that we need to discuss really. So why are we having to have this discussion at all? And I truly believe that we are at fault. This is our fault. How? Because we don't pressure test our material enough. When was the last time that you saw Filipino martial artists testing their Filipino martial arts empty hand versus a boxer, versus a Muay Thai gym, or seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, how to make my stuff work against these people? When was the last time you saw Dummog tried to be applied in a jiu-jitsu setting or a wrestling setting? You just don't see it. And because martial artists, Filipino martial artists aren't willing or don't very often pressure test, they can very easily fall into incorrect assessment of their own skills. And so I want to end this rant by saying that it's up to us to constantly pressure test our material to make sure that what we are teaching people actually works and that we know it works. Not that my teacher knows it works, he has tested it, but I have tested it. And I know what works, I know what doesn't work, and I know what I need to do to make a certain set of material work. Because otherwise, everything is just theoretical, and then it's very easy to question our capabilities. It's very easy because the one thing that MMA guys do is that they're constantly pressure testing their skills. They know what works for them, they know what doesn't work for them because they are pressure testing. If you are not doing the same thing, and you get into confrontation with an MMA person, especially if it's empty hands and you're in their sort of zone of expertise, you're going to really struggle. We are all going to really struggle. And it's all very well to say, yeah, well, I'm just going to take out a knife and stab him. But what if he doesn't give you the chance to? What if he controls you in a way or knocks you out before you're able to reach your weapon, which is a very real possibility with people who are skilled. They don't let you move the way you want to move. And again, unless you pressure test yourself, learn to deal with these situations, you will not be able to answer back when someone says something as idiotic as MMA is the best form of knife defense. Thank you everybody for watching. If you want to see more of my thoughts on training, please do check out our Patreon page. We also put up a bunch of other content every week. We do drill of the week videos. We also, for whatever weekly YouTube videos we shoot, we also have an extra Patreon exclusive version of that, which might have an extra drill, an extra application, or a different perspective on it. So in a week, I'm trying to upload 2 to 3 times on Patreon. And so if you would like to support the channel, or if you would like to see more of this kind of content, please do check out the page. I'm going to leave the link in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to all our patrons for all your support, and see you in the next video.